Well, Tabeen, thank you so much for helping me with my project. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I am a recent graduate of, I just did this multi-master's program in international environmental management. So, kind of looking for a career in like the tree hugging industry. Applying for jobs right now. COVID's been a little stressful on that front, but, you know, having fun, staying at home, playing with the cats, and seeing where things go.
Did you know that NASA is planning to send people back to the moon in 2024?
No, I didn't. I mean, I know there's plans and stuff, but I didn't know about this in particular at all.
Do you know the last time you went to the moon?
I mean, I want to say Apollo, one of the Apollos.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Which
Yeah,
one?
the 1972 was the last one.
Really?
And then the first time that people landed on the moon was 1969. But in December 25th of 1968, we had astronauts go around the moon and they
Hmm.
took that Earth shot photo.
The Rising Earth, yeah.
And some people say that that actually became like the poster for like the environmental movement. That and I was wondering how influential you thought that perspective was in terms of increasing our awareness.
I mean, it definitely played a huge part. It's such an inspiring photo that I think even for those people who like don't particularly care, don't see like the importance of, like protecting the earth, it's like inspiring enough to overcome that. I mean, I'm particularly curious about, I mean, I know we have all the satellite images and stuff of the earth right now, but I would be incredibly excited to see an image like that, like the same angle, same everything, and to see how it's changed since then, because I've definitely probably like more arid lands. I mean, the polar ice caps are melting, so all of that. I think it does a really good job of showing like the vastness of the earth, and I'd love to see it like compared to then. That might be getting ahead of myself, but
No, that would be neat. And it's funny you say the vastness of the Earth because
and that image is showing how small we are. Yeah.
yeah, I know because whenever you're here on the Earth, you look out your front door, you're like, the Earth is so big and it's strong and there's nothing I could do to hurt it, but
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of I made the exact comment of what the exact opposite of what the image is meant to show, of how like small and like comparatively insignificant it really is to the rest of the universe. But I think that is, I think at least from what a lot of those read articles you see about like that image, it played a big part in showing us like, look how we're all part of this like one thing. So I mean, I guess that's kind of the vibe I meant, but I think you're definitely right. Like, it's more, the earth is very small in this large entity that is space.
and what do you think about us going back to the moon? Do you think it's you know, uh, a good thing, or do you think maybe, those efforts should be redirected towards maybe more immediate problems like the environment and poverty and social justice? And now we got this COVID-19 thing,
Yeah.
which is, uh, you know, I think brought us together for longer and more than any type of moon landing would.
I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of room for growth in the coming together with the COVID, especially with a lot of people who refuse to wear masks. It makes no sense. Um, but I mean, I think that just it. I agree with. I'm all in for like the excitement, the innovation, the like that drive of doing it for the sake of science, for that what it means for like the progression of humanity and all of that. I get that drive for it, but I think, as you said, I mean, there's just so many problems on the earth, that so much of which could be solved by that funding, that I feel like it's definitely, and I'm not to say that there shouldn't be research and funding that goes into these kind of initiatives, but there's, especially with how many bad things are happening in recent months, it's hard to say no, we should like focus on problems that aren't immediate. So it's a difficult line to balance on, but
What do you
yeah.
think is the biggest problem right now that you think we should really focus on solving?
I mean, I feel like I'd be remiss to say anything but COVID, just because it's such an immediate threat that's affecting like everyone right now. Um, so I would like, aside from that, I mean, definitely, if not for the sake of my, degree program, I have to say, definitely environmental issues. Just, I'm, I mean, that's just there's so many problems I feel like with an education and all that stuff, race issues. So like, there's just so many problems that like need to be addressed. I think the biggest long term problem, I guess the more like it's hard to say like it's difficult for climate change to feel like an immediate threat, but it just is this growing, slowly encroaching immediate threat. So I feel like, you know, there's so much that needs to be done that we should be maybe focusing on those kind of problems. Of course, after COVID, we have a vaccine for COVID and all that stuff, of course. But I feel like environmental issues would definitely be the thing to be addressing.
Of course, it seems like the COVID situation might have actually helped the environment to some degree, as
Yeah.
people aren't driving, people aren't flying as much.
I mean, I'm really, if for no other reason than just like the data, I don't want this to be out of context, but I'm excited to see the data that we end up seeing after from this COVID crisis. Just like it shows us how we are able to live without, flying all the time, without traveling all the time, without commuting to our offices all the time, with driving much less. So I think I'd like to think that when things go back to normal, we'll see those similar reductions. I mean, I was reading some stuff about a lot of people, a lot of companies like transitioning to doing like half work weeks at home just because it's like working out really well. So I think those like changes will be reflected somewhat. I'm just worried that once things go back to normal, it'll just spike right back up. So all of those clean rivers that we see now, the swans in Venice or whatever, all of those exciting things will lose. So I'm not looking forward to that part of it, but I am excited to see we'll finally have, there's been this theoretical argument, right, with like if people worked just 10% less, we'd see X amount of reduction in greenhouse gases. So now we'll actually be able to, it won't be a theoretical thing that we're throwing out there. It'll be like, listen, if everyone just works from home on Fridays, we will actively see X% reduction in greenhouse gases. So if for no other reason than that, I'm excited to see what the data shows. And we're already, seeing some of that, but I do worry that as soon as this is over, it'll kind of just spike back up to nearly that level. Hopefully a little less by some of the more progressive countries, but I'm not very excited about America and China right now. But
Well, it may even go above what it was
yeah,
before because of all this pent up. We got to do
people needing
everything
to,
right this instant.
yeah. And all the people are like, I couldn't travel, now I need to go. And I mean, there's a lot to be said for like, it's just people missing their families. Like people want to travel to see their families. That that's not something that deserves to be, not allowed. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough. And of course, on the other side of that, there's people who want to take frivolous vacations. But
Uh,
we'll see.
and I'm kind of wondering if this might be the real end to like cities, because land is cheaper in the country. With like high-speed satellite internet, like Starlink is going to be providing, you can be connected wherever you are. You could be solar powered
Wind, whatever.
cars, and you could get Amazon deliver pretty much anything anywhere, and you could get education and work online. It's like,
Hmm.
why live in a city?
I mean, that's something that's an interesting perspective. I mean, I think there's definitely going to be people who want to continue to live in cities for that social aspect, because like consequently from the things you're saying, like people living further out, not traveling into the city as much, people will still be doing driving to see their families. There'll be spikes in the carbon impact of constant or increased deliveries to provide those those food and other needs. So I feel like there might definitely be an environmental like impact in a positive scope of like people doing less traveling, people um, just being better in certain regards. But I feel like there will be the consequent things of having, the massive spike in electricity usage from that kind of thing. The solar panels, wind turbines are all really honestly wonderful technology, but the rare minerals that go into that, like, that's been this big debate in the environmental community, is like, are those the rare minerals worth the environmental benefit of solar panels? So I feel like there's, no such thing as a free lunch. There's the other side of those impacts that, again, I mean, purely from like a data perspective, I would love to see it. But I think there's so many benefits to cities as well. I mean, they're much more walkable. The public transit is available. And of course, that, especially after COVID, I feel like the social aspect, once things are safe, people are going to be cherishing that social aspect a little bit more. I mean, there's just something to be said about, just being able to sit on a sidewalk and like talk to strangers. So I think that kind of stuff is something you get in the city, which it might not happen for a little while, but there's a balance for everything.
But I mean, I I'm not sure what it's like in your neighborhood, but I really don't hang out much with my neighbors anywhere. I feel kind
Yeah,
of isolated, even though
yeah.
I'm surrounded by people. And I've come across like this fellowship of intentional communities, and like the whole intentional community movement, and where like a group of people will like actually set up like housing and a village type of
Mhm.
situation with the intent of actually having that sense of shared space and what have you. And I just wonder if that could be way more fulfilling than having anonymous strangers that you occasionally
Live
see on
there.
the street.
Yeah. I mean, I think I see what you're saying, especially because, like, so in college, I'm, being a recent graduate and all, I feel like you see that a lot more. Like, we actively choose to interact with our roommates and our hallmates and whatnot because, that's we're trying to build those social networks. I feel like living in the suburbs, living as far out as the both of us do, we don't really interact with our neighbors because we've established our communities to be people that we like, are like-minded, or we know them from work, we know them family connections and whatnot. So we end up traveling to see the people that we want to see. We don't intend to really be neighborly, and that might be like a bad thing to say, but our goal is not to be neighborly in the suburbs. But I do find, like, having lived in cities fairly recently, it's like people don't talk to their immediate neighbors, but people tend to talk to the people they choose to become friends with, and then they travel to see those people. Even though it'd be a lot easier to just talk to your neighbors because you're right next to them. But I mean, then there's the whole, I was talking to a friend about like political polarization. So like, we only hang out with like-minded people, and that leads to like that kind of thing. So I definitely say there's downside to like, choosing to only hang out with people that we know or have like want to get to know. So there's a lot of like self-selection with and like-mindedness that goes into that. So on that front, sorry, I feel like I'm like rambling. Um, on that part, I would say, I mean, it just really depends. If you are intending to be friends with your neighbors, then it'd be really beneficial to go move to a kind of those intentional living places where people want to like make those kind of connections, and that definitely happens for like on college campuses. And I think that's kind of where that idea, or not the idea, comes from, but just that, I guess that's what those intentional communities are trying to emulate, is like people who are going in looking to meet like other people. I mean, and I've definitely come across those. I was just casually looking at housing in like DC because I'm like applying for jobs in DC, and I've seen a couple of those of just like these established, like they're designed, they have events, it's like a giant building. You're meant to meet others, not just a quiet apartment that you just go straight to your own room. So, I mean, that would solve that, living nearby, not having to travel as much, but actively interacting with your neighbors.
Of course, sometimes you just maybe want to be unobserved.
Yeah, that's the other part of it. Like, I don't want to like talk to anyone once I come home. It's been a busy day.
Exactly. I may be sad, but that doesn't mean talking about it's going to make it better.
Yeah, you just want to wallow, sit in your room with some ice cream. But
Exactly.
yeah.
Um, but I mean, oh, Elon Musk, he has his company SpaceX, and they've been kind of improving the ability to access space, and he's doing like the worldwide um, internet satellite thing.
Hmm.
But his big driver, he says, is to build a city on Mars by 2050,
Hmm.
and to be able to make it so that an average middle class family would be able to like liquidate everything they have and choose to immigrate to Mars
Yeah.
if they want. Um, Putting aside kind of maybe the feasibility and the the technological barriers of that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have some thoughts about that. So, like, to start with, I mean, of course, like all the things that the sci-fi movies set up to like scare us about. Aside from those, I mean, I feel like, I mean, again, you said not to mention the viability and the feasibility, but I feel like there's no really escaping the fact that it would be, there'd be a lot of barriers to entry. You know, like he, as much as I like what he's saying about ensuring that the average middle class family can do it, I feel like there's so many like inherent structural racism that we're seeing right now that, you know, there's so many barriers to people being middle class. It just, there's an inherent inequality that would be hard to overcome. That again is not the fault of the program and shouldn't like stop that from, it shouldn't be, it should be classified as accessible, and I understand that, but it's just, there's so many barriers I feel like would be brought up that it would be important to ensure that kind of thing. And then all the sci-fi things about like, oh, you know, how Earth will be turned into a resource farm and there will be just this nice utopia and everything is burning at in Earth, which I feel like there's not like truth to that exaggerated extent, but I feel like, you know, as clearly climate change is getting worse, all of these rich elites will be able to leave and not have to deal with the consequences that they're creating. Um, that, and like, what is the carbon impact of sending that many people to Mars? Like, all of that carbon that's going to be emitted is going somewhere. And of course, you know, doing it as sustainably as possible. Of course, I'm sure that's part of the plan, but there's still those impacts still, they still exist. I mean, then the sending, because Mars doesn't really have, you know, the water, the infrastructure isn't there, so all that has to be built from scratch. Where are those resources coming from? I mean, at least for the first however long, there's going to have to be, you know, seeds and other materials that are constantly being shipped there. Like, I feel like the in theory it's a wonderful idea. In practice, I worry that it's going to be this long-term drain on Earth that Earth doesn't need. And then of course opportunity cost, you know, all of that money, all of that research, all that, those funds, as wonderful as that exciting innovation is, would that money not be better spent, you know, elevating more people to the middle class and like improving livelihoods all around? So it's just this big thing, because I mean, I'm as excited about, you know, that innovation as anybody is, but it's just, there's so many problems that could be better solved with that money, is kind of where I stand,
But
especially on the climate change front.
but if you look out, say 500 years, and using your most optimistic view of humanity, which I know is difficult in this time, but
Yeah,
just
it is.
but you're maybe more in a wish or a dream or that type of thing. What do you think humanity looks like in 500 years? Like, what would you want it to look like?
I mean, my first reaction was like, look at how far we've come since the last 500 years. But again, I mean, there's been such exponential growth that that's not really a great, you know, indicator. Um, I mean, I feel like we have so many social problems. I guess I'd like to think that the social problems would be solved. There would be like no inequity, no inequality, no inherent structural problems. And, you know, I think I'd like to see that happen, you know, on Earth, for purely for the reason of, I just don't, it'd be nice, man, I don't know. I mean, I think if we're able to solve all of the structural problems on Earth, then I'm all for, you know, like, let's colonize Mars. I just feel like, one, maybe I'm just not it like um faith, I don't have that faith in humanity. I don't know when I lost that, for that to be achieved, because I don't think we'll be able to solve these kind of structural problems. um and I worry that no matter like, even if we, you know, I'd like to think we've saved Earth and then we've moved on to also colonize Mars because we have that many people. But there's going to be inherent like inequality there. So I don't know. I really don't know. In an ideal world, if it can be done completely perfectly, you know, with a utopia on both resulting planets, or however many planets at that point, then sure. I just don't think that utopia will be achieved. And it might be achieved on one of the planets, but that will create far more problems on the remaining planet if it can be
Uh,
achieved.
So describe this utopia to me. Like, what is it like? How does it work?
Oh,
What's your average day in utopia like?
well, I think that's just it though. Like as soon as you ask that question, I'm like, well, like all these young adult novels that we read about dystopias, they all started out as plans for utopias. So, in an ideal world, no world hunger, no lack of water, no lack of energy. I don't want to go so far as to say like full like communism by any means, but a working economic system that supports all of its people. I mean, um, accessible healthcare, all of the, no structural racism, no structural inequities, um, no, long-term effects of climate change, no war, no genocide. So, I mean, I feel like there's just so many, like, to solve all of these problems that we are seeing just in our news on a day to day. I mean, I don't know if it would take 500 years, but if we're able to create a world that has removed all of those issues, I mean, I'm all for it, but it just, yeah, I mean, I guess that would be the utopia, would be that lack of all of these world problems. But then again, the my generation is very much the dystopian novel generation. Is something will go wrong there, you can't create that kind of utopia because there's some level of how do you govern that. There's society goes towards chaos, everything goes towards chaos. So even if you do achieve that, how long will it last? And then once it's taken over by one despot, it'll everything will completely fall apart. And um so I don't know. And I'd like to think a utopia is achievable, and I'd like to, whatever I said a minute ago about what a utopia is, I hope I included all those important things, but I don't see it happening. I guess that doesn't, exclude wishing for it, but I don't know. If all of those world problems are solved, let's go for it, but let's solve those problems first.
And Jeff Bezos, he also has a space company.
Yeah. I mean, I have some opinions about Jeff Bezos right now. Especially with like the stuff that came up about the Amazon workers being asked to work in their, um, in the conditions with like. But then it got really newsworthy, so stuff improved. But um, I mean that's just it though. Like, can there be a utopia with the existence of billionaires? Jeff Bezos could solve the crisis in Yemen 1,000 times over. Um, so as wonderful as it is of people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos being excited to create these kind of utopias, by their very existence, they negate the function of utopias, I
Now,
feel.
you're the second person I've interviewed that brought up Yemen. I interviewed a guy at Starbucks. His name was Qasim, I
Mm-hmm.
think, and he was talking about Yemen has like the longest run famine ever.
Yeah, I mean, it was what I read somewhere, like all it needs is like 4 billion to solve. Like Jeff Bezos could solve it like over 100 times over easily.
But
And
so you have the $4 billion. What happens then?
I mean, it goes to what UN, World Food Program, whatnot. Stuff's being given out, but that doesn't solve. It'll solve the crisis. It'll feed everyone, but there's structural problems that have created that crisis, right? The failure of government, the society becoming that way, and then the climate change causing the droughts that have created the crisis in the first place. So I feel like there's so many deeper issues that the 4 billion is just the first step in like quickly solving the immediate hunger issues, but that wouldn't solve the, like, once you give that 4 billion, then if you don't solve the like lack of water there, lack of irrigation, you're just going to need another 4 billion the next year because they can't feed themselves without a working agriculture cultural system. But
But I mean, like, I like to think money actually isn't anything. I mean, it's just like paper, right? But
yeah,
the really the usefulness and money is in organizing labor and material and that type of thing, right? I mean, if you don't have an engineer to build you a rocket, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you're not going to get a rocket out of it.
yeah. I hope you can. He started his meowing. Kipper has started the talking at the door. I hope that's not coming through.
It's not.
Um,
I have
okay,
no clue.
I can hear him just like he's just starting. Um, I'm able to ignore it, but it's just I really hope that does. I'm assuming there's gonna be some editing happening here, but
No, I really literally post them all
oh
over
well, that's
all.
fine too. They'll just hear me talking about my cat. Um, so I think that's it though. Like, yes, you're right. Like, money is just this thing, but I mean that's kind of like a not like I don't want to say like privileged thing to say, but it's just like money might not be the end all be all, but money definitely helps, especially like in these kind of situations. Sure, you can't build a rocket without an engineer, but you won't have engineers unless they have the money to send their kids to school. Um, and I think if not, the paper money, there's always been in the history of time, there's been some sort of trading of goods. Paper money is just a proxy for that, like you know, trading of value, the bartering system that existed before paper money. So if not, like, I would say it's not so much, without a skilled person, you can't have the rockets. It's without the money to put those skills in, to create the schools, to provide the water to send those kids to school. You don't have the ability to create an engineer to create the rockets. So, I mean, I think money might not be the solution, but it's definitely definitely part of the solution.
Well, I mean, it's also, a lot of emphasis put into getting credentialed and going to like a prestigious educational institution. But ultimately, it's about learning like skills and the knowledge and that. And you don't necessarily have to go to school to do that, right? I mean, and there's a lot of people who
Yeah,
go to school who at the
I
end
mean,
of it, they have the
massive
degree
student loan debt.
and they have the massive student loan debt, right? Um, it's like I guess programming is like the ultimate probably example of this. Like you could literally could become an expert programmer without ever going to school because all the materials are available online, all your resources are available there. All you have to do is kind of have that vision and then be able to
True.
have the tenacity and kind of like the resourcefulness to make it happen. But then you
Hmm.
have a lot of people who go through computer science programs, they come out of it, and they would not be able to create you a solution to any
Hmm.
problem, and so I
Yeah,
guess,
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
and I guess so you could like give millions of dollars to some people to go to school, and uh, that they're not able to get like um, this capability, but then you have all these other avenues to get these capabilities, and at the end
Hmm.
of the day it's like the capability, not the
Yeah,
path.
I mean, I see what you're saying, and it's definitely true. Especially, I did the whole Ivy Tower elitism thing with my choice of university, and it's true. It's not the university; it's the person who goes there, the skills that they have, the self-driven drive. That did not make it. Clearly, two contrasting things. Ivy League, self-driven drive. So, not that smart of a person. Um, but that's just it, though. The only reason that people like me, so someone could have all the drive in the world, but if they don't have the money to go to get that primary school education, or to get that, the technology, that to have a computer at home, there's still so many lasting inequalities that don't guarantee, even if you are, IQ of whatever, you have all the tools in your own head, all the drive that you could need, all of the perseverance that you would need to achieve that in the way that you're saying. You could have all of that, but without the money, without the social programs, the social, just the like society structures that we go through, all that would mean nothing if you don't have the ability to get that initial education. So you're able to like read, to get the food on the table, the living in a, like Pavlov's hierarchy of needs, like that food, water, basic needs, shelter, having the security, the job, and finally getting to that level of actualization, like that you would need to achieve. You can't you can't utilize those inherent skills without the money and the social structures that allow you to utilize them. So 100%, I think that's why, it's so important to have like public education, public universities, vocational programs, training programs like that. But more than that is creating like making sure there's resources for everyone to tap into that kind of potential, because it's not fair for like, there's so many inequalities with like I was only able to get to that education because I had the resources to be able to get there. And it's far more important that, like, sure, if I didn't have the drive, I wouldn't have been able to get there. But I mean, and on the other hand, like that's definitely true for like computer programming, 100%. I mean, I've considered it myself, trying to quickly, in this COVID time, it's a great time to quickly like take a coding boot camp. Or I've seen these like super expensive coding boot camps on the other side of the internet. It's like, here's how to do it for free. So that's definitely true for that. But aside from the jobs like coding, that we need the vocational training, we need, people, we need mechanics, we need teachers, we need all these important people, like, to address all the needs of our society. We need every employee that we have to be doing all the work, and that work needs to be accessible. So I think to an extent it's definitely true that it doesn't matter if you don't have the drive to do it, and money doesn't create that. But I think that if you establish a base level where everyone has access to all of that, then 100% it only matters if you have that drive. But without that base level that we can't ensure right now in America, maybe in like the wonderful Finlands, the Norways, where they have a solid social system, that's definitely more applicable. But I feel like in especially with this pandemic and the racial crisis has revealed, we're far from that, having those resources be widespread enough for that dream to be achieved.
Yeah, I mean, I think money is how we've kind of addressed this issue in our society in terms of allocation of resources and opportunity and that type of thing. So I understand, like, um, the equity issues involved, but I guess ultimately at the end of the day, the money is only good if you go to a market and get that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, it's not the money or the market that matters, it's the availability of that thing. Like,
Yeah.
um, it's not how much does the the student have in terms of money to be able to spend on a school, to be able to get a teacher. It's about the teacher that's capable, that's able to like enlighten that student. And I think, to some extent, if you look at our public education system now, you have like these school districts that have massive budgets, but then the curriculums that they have and like the amount of actual development that they do inside of their classrooms is very uh, basic. I mean, there's just like so much, it feels like wasted opportunity, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. It's so true. There's a lot of waste, but just because there is the existence of inefficient systems doesn't mean that, because at the same time as there's these public schools that are like like not overfunded, but they're having a lot of wasteful funding occurring. I have a friend who was telling me recently that her, like, in her high school, her library shut down, like, because like what kind of school doesn't have a library? That's some of the only places that students can access computers. If they don't have, we were lucky enough and privileged enough to be able to go to a high school that, my high school didn't provide us laptops. My sister's high school, every student gets a free laptop. But there's districts who just, they can't give that out. They don't have the funding. I mean, that's directly linked to this other thing I was involved with in college with schools are funded by property taxes. So wealthier neighborhoods have more funding in schools, so they have the freedom to have that wasteful spending. But the existence of certain schools having the wasteful spending doesn't negate the issue that so many schools have the exact opposite, and the fact that that is exacerbated by deep-seated like racial inequalities makes that like complete, I don't know, it just, there's this problem. That doesn't mean more money isn't needed in education to solve the problem on this side of, yeah, kind of, I don't know, I don't know if that made any sense at all, but I guess what I'm trying to say is just like there's so many things in the school system that would be solved by money. And ideally, maybe all that wasteful spending that they're doing in those schools should be sent towards the schools that are lacking that funding, that desperately need that funding.
I mean, a lot of those schools, they have dilapidated buildings. They have students that are really below grade level. They have issues with violence. So even if those schools had money, right, until they're able to create a nice, safe learning environment, it's going to be hard to attract the teachers to be able to
Yeah.
do what, to be able to have effective schooling.
Well, I mean, I feel like that's another thing that this current racial crisis is creating, is making us aware of, is how the reason that those kind of school environments exist. We look into it, we're seeing far more schools in people of color, in neighborhoods full of people of color, with like lower income neighborhoods. We see there are no school counselors, but multiple police in the school buildings. There's studies being done on how that causes, by having a police officer in your school, you're inherently more unsafe. Um, Especially when it's targeting Black and Brown communities. There's been studies showing, of course, teachers don't want to work in unsafe schools. So, the better educated, more, it's so systematic when you look into it. It's like crazy how like deeply ingrained these kind of issues are. The teachers who went to better universities, better educational programs, they self-select into these safer schools. So lesser qualified teachers are going into these less safe schools because they need it. So then students are getting subpar education because only teachers that are choosing to go to those schools are the ones who are less educated. So there's a whole cycle there that a lot of these things can be solved by increasing, like, even just providing, like, I was reading this one study a while ago about just the sheer rise in grades when you provide free lunch and breakfast to students. So of course students aren't working and don't have good grades if they come from a home life that can't feed them. So I mean, there's some, again, the Pavlov thing, right? Like if you provide the food, the water, the shelter, and that start building those basic needs, then those things will automatically be solved. So a lot of these things that are coming out now within the racial crisis are showing that it's far more important that we provide that funding to these schools to bring better teachers in. If you bring better teachers in, the students will be better taught. If you provide free lunch and breakfast, the students will be better taught. You remove the cops and you put in counselors, the students will be better taught. So there's a way to solve all those issues in schools that are suffering, that are in bad areas and are bad because they're in bad areas. By I mean, it just kind of comes down to money. If you provide the funding for better teachers will be hired. If you provide the funding for free meals, the students will not be hungry. If you provide actual counseling and peer support for them, the students will be happier, and that'll create a safer school. Not and again, the fact that schools are funded by property taxes is ridiculous. So
And I mean, it's also, if your parents are divorced and you only have
yeah,
one parent at home, if that parent is having to work 3 or 4 jobs, if that
yeah, like
parent
the amount of
does,
dad my dad gave me so much tutoring at home, like that is a free resource. I mean, the very fact that the SAT scores are correlated with parental income, not how smart you are, how much education you had. Like SAT, what is it? The math section ends at sixth grade math, right? Why do so many people have a hard time with SAT until you take a prep course at one of these elite prep institutions, and then you don't get into a better college because you didn't go to the prep institution? So there's just this inherent inequities there
yeah.
that
And
money will solve.
I just read a book called The Color of Law, and it
Mhm.
talks about these systemic segregation and what have you. And, it kind of goes through the whole history of pretty much like the last 120 years in terms of inequities in the US. I mean, one of the things is, like the GIs that came back from World War II, the VA
White
loans
soldiers
were,
got it.
yeah, and the black ones couldn't. And then you had like these communities like Levittown and what have you, where you could buy really cheap housing if you're white. And then like the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, they
They
would
like
provide insurance on
only
loans, but they only
explicitly only to white people.
right. And
And it's like explicit language as recently as the 70s that would like explicitly exclude Black communities. And then at the same time as the GI Bill is happening, redlining is happening. So all these, white people are moving out into the suburbs where Black people are not allowed to go, buying the cheap land, starting to build generations of equity in their houses. Black people are forced to stay in inner cities where the property values are not high. It just, and then when
but
they
the
do, yeah,
but the property values aren't high in the inner cities because um, people aren't developing there is one thing. But the second thing is because there's fewer housing choices, that means that people are having to like double up and triple up and pay more for essentially the same or worse house, which means
yeah,
there's less money for like maintenance and for
yeah.
other things. So it's like, there's like a whole, it's a good book. I
And the
recommend it.
fact that people are reading, or like even like the existence of rent, the fact that people of color rent far more than white people, and then the fact that when you rent, you're not you're not putting your stuff, you're not putting the money towards the equity, you're losing quote unquote all the money that you're putting into the house, like that long term inequity that's created by the existence of like renting is just another contributor there. No, I know I haven't I haven't heard of the exact book that you're talking about, but again, if nothing else, this racial crisis has brought up all these really good books. I have like 4 books on my like to buy list. um I have them on my Amazon list, but I don't want to buy them on Amazon right now, and I wanted to go to Barnes and Noble to buy them, but then I can't because all the spikes in the cases. So
BN.com,
yeah,
halfprice.com,
yeah, I mean I
thriftbooks.com.
yeah. No, I mean, I went to the online Barnes and Noble, but then the, like 2 of the 4 books I have are unavailable right now, which I think either means that like enough people are buying them that like their sales have spiked. So yeah, so definitely, yeah, the next step is Barnes and Noble.
Awesome. Yeah, there are definitely lots of problems to be solved here. It's difficult to see what the answer is, but I mean, you can't solve problems you don't try to solve. That's one thing for
Yeah.
sure. So,
And again, none of this is to negate the importance of that research and development and innovation and all of that stuff that needs to happen. Like all of these, all the STEM schools, the STEM programs, like that's what this is for, right? Like we want our students to achieve, um, that do the thing that they're interested in, get it's amazing what technology is doing, and we should continue to, create that. And that's only going to happen if we keep supporting innovation. I just feel like it would be made more equitable and it would be easily solved if if we solved those base issues of like, hunger, shelter, whatever. We solve all, not whatever, we solve all of those. Came out a little callous. Um, it's more important that we solve all of those, create that base that then everyone, there's a chance like if we solve all those base issues, then more people will be able to achieve that desire to do the STEM education and create these amazing robots and whatnot, if they have the opportunity to do so, which they won't have until we, solve those things first.
that's true. Well, okay, back to
Okay.
our original
So
topic. If it
yeah.
if it was safe and affordable, would you have any interest in going to space yourself?
Oh, 100%. Like I love traveling. I don't want to, this is going to sound so shallow, if for no other reason than the novelty of it, of course. Um, but I think not, I guess my caveat would be safe, affordable, equitable, and like, not inherently, that's just it. There's no say, you're never going to achieve that. But if in our wildest dreams, um, I'm not only having this opportunity because of the privilege that I grew up with, then 100%. Um, so I don't know how that would be done. Maybe like a pure lottery, that could work. But um, no, yeah, it would be amazing. Like, I mean, I know what one of those astronauts was saying that took that the rising Earth photo. It was just like the most like marvelous thing to see, and that would be just beyond amazing to see.
Yeah, it would be. What was there any topic that we didn't get to talk about that you wanted to?
I don't know. I feel like it was so like meandering. I've kind of forgotten what we've talked about, and I hope it like I didn't detract or go too far or go too like social justicey. Um,
No, I
I
think
mean,
it's great.
I think that would be the thing to talk about though, is like of all the things we talked about, there's so many more issues. Like none of this touched LGBT rights. None of this touched like, we talked a lot about like racial inequality, but there's so much like there's indigenous people that have like the similar, issues. There's the crisis in Yemen, but there's also the crisis in so many other countries in Africa, the Middle East, and the stuff in Hong Kong right now. Like, I mean, I think that's another thing that was like close to that. Like, I think that's, the kind of authoritarianism that's a really big risk with these kind of quote unquote utopian goals. There's, again, all of these were like young adult fiction books, but all of those, sorry, my phone is vibrating. Stop. Okay. All of these utopias, they end up with some sort of authoritarian regime. Like, so I mean, again, just because that happened in a random fiction book doesn't mean it's gonna happen, but the markers are there, and we're actively seeing right now the effects of that authoritarianism in Hong Kong right now. So I mean, I guess it just goes back to there's so many issues. So yeah, that's kind of it. I mean, it's very just making me sad and morbid about the state of world affairs. But
Oh my goodness. Yes. All we have to do is solve one, and we can just make one better.
yeah,
That's one
I
less we
think
have to worry about.
yeah, there was this great Hassan Minhaj clip a while ago where he was kind of just like, listen, I'm just going to give you permission right now to care about three less things. Just, it's okay. We're hearing all this news. We've got all of these things going on in the world. Just forget about three of them. Just make it, you are absolved from caring about three of them. So I think that's just kind of what it, not like to that extent. Of course, we should still care about everything. But you know, and another thing, Senator Cory Booker was my graduation speaker. And something he said in that speech was, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And that stuck with me, of just like, just because you can't solve it all, you can't achieve it all, doesn't mean you shouldn't try. So you're very right in like, just make one thing better.
Yeah, a little bit better. And if we keep take one step and then take the next step and then take the next step, we'll get a lot further than trying to plan the perfect trip.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I am excited to see where this all goes. And it's just so cool to have a man on the moon. That's amazing.
Well, they're planning to put the first woman on the moon, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I heard about that. Whatever happened with that, there was the all-female spacewalk that
Oh, it
got canceled
happened?
because it happened later,
It
right?
it
But
did
it got
happen later,
canceled
yeah.
because they didn't have enough suits of the right size.
That's true.
Oh, sorry. And gender equality. We didn't even talk about gender equality.
Yes, I know.
So there's just so many things.
In order for mankind to go out into the rest of the universe, we're going to need all the brains we can get
Yeah,
and all the unique perspectives. So equity is not an option.
yeah.
Uh, it, it's required.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm excited to see what happens, and I hope it happens in the most sustainable, equitable way. But I don't know. I don't know. I just, I don't
Well,
know. Just it's more just like Bezos can solve world hunger, and instead, is that money better spent? But that's the debate, right?
yeah, I know ego and legacy versus
Yeah, because I mean,
ego and
he'd go
legacy.
down in history about having this amazing space program. But would he not also go down in history for solving the crisis in Yemen?
Um, don't know.
Yeah, a lot to be
Uh,
seen. But I don't know. Did you have any other questions?
No, no, that was it. I really appreciate your time, and
Yeah, of course.
I know
I
we
enjoyed
went
this.
way over 30 minutes, but
It's fine. I hope
but
you just, I don't know, I cleaned my room a little bit, but now there's like
oh,
a towel on the
it
chair.
looks
So
it looks perfect. Yeah, if you saw the past videos, you'd be like, ah, forget it.
that's fine. And you know what? Like, let's give the people who are watching this 400 years from now a true image of my room. It was the towel was always there.
Well, I mean, it goes to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah,
There's the important. Have you read the book?
vaguely. I mean, I remember the what is it? The answer is always 42.
Yeah, yeah, the answer to life, universe, and everything else. But the big advice about in the Hitchhiker's Guide is always carry your towel,
Mm.
because if you have your towel, then people go, well, he must have everything he needs. He just doesn't have it at this moment. So be it a spacesuit or water or food or what have you. But anyway, they talk
Thank you
about
for thinking better about the towel.
yeah, no,
That
towel is a
one.
key thing. That'll
Yeah,
get you around the
really.
universe.
Yeah. Should read that.
You should read it. You would love it.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think I read it like in like second grade. I don't even know. I read it such a long time ago that I don't remember it at all. So clearly I didn't read it, but I don't know. So many books.
I
But yeah,
it's it starts out with a really relevant story. It talks about how the monkeys came down from the trees and became humans and developed digital watches. And there was a problem with the people because most of them were unhappy most of the time. And they try to solve this by moving around green pieces of paper, which is odd because it wasn't the green pieces of paper that were unhappy, you know.
yeah,
And it's like it was
it's
really,
a really good it started with a really good like fable.
yeah, yeah. I think you might enjoy it, but
Yeah.
anyway. And then this person comes with a solution to everything, but unfortunately, before she could tell us anybody, she gets killed in a car accident. So, but
Mm.
that's the sad part.
I mean, I have been looking for more content, so I think I'll add that to my list.
Actually, I don't think it's a car accident. I think the entire planet got destroyed. But anyway, minor
Oh, yeah,
detail.
even better. No, no. Sarcasm is like a thing that is translated well in the 400 years from now that, whoever watches this and they don't think I'm someone who wishes planets were destroyed.
Oh yeah, I don't know. You have no idea how language changes over
They're
time.
setting
But
me up for failure. They're going to think that I'm a terrible person.
you have no idea. What happens between now and then. This could be.
Yeah.
Um, um, yeah. Well, anyway, thank you so much, and
Yes, of course.
we'll
Say
talk
hi to your
again
family
soon.
from me. And yeah, hopefully we see each other again in a safe manner and stay safe and healthy and all that.
Well, thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye bye.